I just figured out what was wrong with my drone. It was just the wind. That's right. DJI's current conclusion for what happened in my flyaway is that the wind blew it away. Here's the email right here. Hi Don, I've already received the feedback from our support team. Great news! And here's the result of their analysis. After carefully checking the flight, the strong wind carried the drone away. There was a sudden strong wind and high wind warning popped up a few times to warn the user. However, the user, that'd be me, keeps ignoring the warning. Also, during return to home, the strong wind is pushing the drone back. The drone is struggling to fly back to home point because of the harsh environment. So before we talk about that harsh environment, let's just think about this for a few minutes. DJI Mavic 2 is safety rated for a 35 km/h wind. In other words, it can easily handle a 35 km wind and hover steadily. And we all know that it can handle a lot more than that. But 35 km wind is fine. My drone was going 90 km/h when it was out of control, which means that the wind must have been 90 plus 35 over 120 km/h in order to cause it to go out of control and that silly user to ignore the strong wind warning. Now, let's have a look at the actual weather condition at the time. So here's footage from the beginning of my flight, and you can see that the weird horizon thing is going on. But if you ignore that, it's a beautiful day, 21 degrees Celsius, nice fluffy clouds, virtually no wind. I estimated it as 10 to 15 km/h wind. And where the flyaway occurred, which was about halfway between that far shore and where this drone is right now, this is just hovering just off my dock, it's about 200 meters to the middle of the lake where the flyaway occurred. There is no way there was a 120 km/h wind 200 meters away, and I'm sitting there listening to basically pan flutes because it was such a beautiful day. No way. Try again, DJI. I'm sure you can dig out something. Before I go any further, let me quickly recap what happened. So on September the 1st, 2019, I was flying my Mavic 2 Pro drone at my cottage over the water, where I do all the time, with no issue whatsoever. And I started to do a hyperlapse. The weather was beautiful, 21 degrees Celsius, very low wind. Started to do this hyperlapse, and out of nowhere, the drone went out of control. I lost joystick control entirely. I had continuous visual connectivity to the camera, which was scary. And the drone hit a maximum speed of over 90 km/h. Thankfully, when I hit the return to home button, it did respond, and I regained control and was able to land safely, and everything's been fine. And the dry cleaning helped tremendously with my pants. The story of that flyaway is in a video I published a couple of weeks ago, and the link is right up here. First of all, I want to thank all the people who watched the flyaway video and have provided their support, their insights, their suggestions, and their own experiences with flyaways. The level of support has been overwhelming, so thank you. One thing that I have not been impressed with is the level of support from DJI. They've been responsive, to their credit. I get a response back pretty much every day, and I keep pushing back, and you'll see some of the things that have gone on. I've never called the DJI support line before, never had a problem worthy of needing to call a helpline, and I've never used the DJI Assistant either, the tool that allows you to extract the flight logs and submit them to DJI for analysis. So I had no expectations other than the usual of helplines don't tend to be very helpful. So it didn't start well. The first thing that happened is their servers were down, so I couldn't upload the flight log. And even several days later, they were not. So I ended up putting it on a Google Drive and sending them the link, and they said, "Oh, great, thanks." And that's where the fun began. The first thing they came back with was this email that I'm showing on the screen now. I was so pleased to hear that there's no indication of a product malfunction. Okay, didn't say that there was, but maybe there is. I don't know. And that really I should be following the safety guidelines. So interesting. Then when I said, okay, but what about the flyaway? They came back with this the same day. The unit does not fly away. It didn't happen. So don't worry about it. It didn't happen. But rather, I was in a hyperlapse mode. Please refer to the following tutorial on how to do a hyperlapse. That blew my mind. And then they said, by the way, even though there's no malfunction, you go ahead and send in your craft for repair at your own expense. And then they came back with this one most recently saying that it was the strong wind, and gosh, you really should watch out for those 120 km/h winds, because it's kind of a harsh environment. So let's walk through the theories about what might have gone wrong. First theory is that my compass calibration was off. Well, as it happens, I had done a compass calibration just a few days before at this same location. So very unlikely that that was an issue. And it might explain the drifting at the beginning of my flight, but it wouldn't explain the flyaway. The second theory is a good one as well. It is that the IMU, the inertial management unit, was not calibrated properly or had gone out of calibration. And that's a good one because I had not, in fact, done an IMU calibration since March when I first bought the drone, so about 6 months. So it's entirely possible that somehow it got out of calibration, and that would explain maybe the drift at the beginning of the flight, might even explain the flyaway if it got confused about its movement and took off. It wouldn't explain why I lost control though, in terms of joystick control, because I had no joystick control whatsoever. So that's a little strange. Third theory is about flying low over the water. I was flying 11 meters and there were ripples on the water, and the visual positioning system, or VPS, might have been confused by those ripples, and so it decided to take off. Again, very possible. There's no indication of that in the flight logs, and by the way, there's no indication of an IMU error or a compass error in the flight logs either, nor is there an indication of a GPS loss. So if the visual positioning system got confused by the rippling water underneath it, the reflections might have made it go a little crazy, that might have caused the flyaway, no question. But again, why did I not have any joystick control? That doesn't fit that theory at all. The fourth theory is related to the KP index. I didn't mention this in the original video, but a number of people asked in the comments below. You should have a look at those comments. There's a lot of very interesting suggestions and interpretation. And again, thank you everyone who took the time to leave those comments. The KP index is what's called a planetary K index, and it measures the amount of geomagnetic activity around the Earth. And it's a scale of 0 to 9. It's an average of a number of stations that measure this geomagnetic activity. 0 to 4 is considered perfectly normal, pretty safe. 5 to 6 is a first level geomagnetic storm, and then it gets much, much worse after that, sort of in a logarithmic fashion. So on September the 1st, I didn't realize this before the flight, but I realized it when I looked into it later. On September the 1st, the KP index was actually 5. There was a period of time, a 3-hour period, when it was 6, but that wasn't when I was flying. But, 5 or 6, it's certainly an indication that there was something weird going on. So what's the impact of a high KP index? What it is a geomagnetic storm in the ionosphere, so high in the atmosphere, and the main impact is on GPS positioning. So that very well could explain why at the beginning of my flight, I had a lower than normal number of GPS satellites locked in. I had 11. Later in the flight though, I had 16. So, I don't know, probably the KP index was, or the geomagnetic storm was a reason I had fewer satellites at the beginning of my flight. I normally have 16, 19, that sort of number. But it wouldn't explain why it flew away. It might explain that the positioning system was off by a few meters at the most when you lose some satellites. Maybe that combined with the visual positioning sensor problem looking at rippling water, maybe that confused the whole thing and made it go crazy. Not sure. But again, it wouldn't explain why I lost control stick access. Makes no sense whatsoever, particularly when I still had my camera view working perfectly fine. And again, KP index affects your communications with satellites or other things like in aircraft. It can affect your radio communications because you're at a very high altitude. But KP index does not, at least at a 5 or a 6, would not indicate a very likely interference with radio communications at 200 or 300 meters. Wouldn't have a significant impact on that. And the last theory is some sort of a hardware fault. Now, my initial looks at the logs, the basic logs, did not show any sort of hardware faults whatsoever. No GPS errors, nothing like that. But someone helped me out and did look into those logs, and they indicate that there are over 40 instances where the ESC, the electronic speed control, was issuing errors. Now, I've asked DJI about this, and DJI support has not responded, at least at this point. Give them time to get over their wind problem, but they haven't responded to that hardware error yet. That could very well be the problem. Now, what would cause the electronic speed controller to go out of whack suddenly? Because I've not had any problem whatsoever up until this point. One possibility is that right now, we're at an 11-year low in terms of solar activity, sunspots and things like that. Solar activity goes on an 11-year cycle. And when the solar activity is at a low, the shielding around the Earth's magnetic field is at a low, and cosmic rays come through at an all-time high. So we're getting an all-time high of cosmic rays hitting the atmosphere. Now, generally, the atmosphere shields us poor humans on the ground from cosmic rays. But what happens is that the cosmic rays hit the atmosphere, generates a neutron cascade through our atmosphere, which in turn can actually generate alpha particles within electronics, which can cause unexplainable defects, memory, bit flips, all sorts of weird things. So maybe that's what's going on. I don't know, really hard to prove. So I'm really interested in seeing what DJI comes back with in terms of the ESC errors that we're seeing. So since that time, the weather has really sucked. You can see the high wind on this little time lapse here. I did go out and calibrate the compass, and then I calibrated the IMU unit, then I calibrated the compass again, and I flew the drone. You can see, well, I flew around a little square and all the rest of that. And then I just had it hovering just a few feet off the ground, and it was steady as a rock. It was not budging, and it just sat there, and I watched it and watched it. Nothing happened. It was the most boring flight ever. So with renewed confidence, I went out and just flew around a little bit. I flew over the water. I stayed high for the initial part. And then I came in low, and this is pretty much exactly where I was flying the other day. This movement is deliberate, so it wasn't causing any problems. You can see there's similar sort of wind, much more overcast, so maybe the reflections off the water were different. But I certainly didn't have any problems flying, and I landed the drone and everything was fine. So did the calibration fix everything, or is there some latent problem sitting there that's going to come and bite me in the butt? I guess we'll see, and I'll let you know. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. I'd love to hear your comments on the various theories and your experiences with DJI support. Again, responsive, but not really helpful unless I'm really pushing on them. Thanks again. Talk to you again soon.